When I think about film, I often find myself remembering an interview response from Harrison Ford on the topic of the meaning behind his recent film, Blade Runner 2049.
It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's an engaging question.
That's what I love.
And I'd rather have great questions than great answers.
Ford had been asked about the true answer to one of sci-fi's eternal debates. Is the original Blade Runner's protagonist, Deckard, a human or a replicant? And while audiences have long been enamored with answering that age-old question, I'm not sure it's the answer itself that gives the film's themes so much power, but rather the inherent drive for discussion that it promotes. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner is intentionally open-ended. The truth behind Deckard's existence is of little importance when the journey to seeking out that truth holds significantly more thematic weight. On a surface level, this narrative mechanic works to draw the viewer in, to engage with the film and spark long-lasting discussions that will remain within the pop culture zeitgeist longer than the actual film itself. But withholding this answer does more than just simply drive engagement. It nudges the viewer to ask questions that enable the film to communicate its themes on a level more profound than any definitive answer could. Looking back at some of the most popular and influential films in recent memory, it becomes apparent that this writing device is not confined to Blade Runner. It's widespread, intentional, and powerful. Who, if either of the two remaining survivors in John Carpenter's The Thing, is infected? Is Ophelia's fantasy in Pan's Labyrinth just that, or does it hold some ground in reality? Who or what is responsible for the gruesome murders we bear witness to in Kiyoshi Kurosawa's film Cure? Is the killer of Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder one of the suspects the detectives have already apprehended and questioned, or someone else entirely? What can possibly explain the deadly plague that spreads through Na Hong Jin's small rural village and his film The Wailing? These questions create the stages that enable these films to draw the viewer toward discovering their deeper themes. We feel an innate human urge to analyze evidence, construct our own narratives, and discover hidden truths. Yet the value of ambiguous storytelling lies not in satisfying that urge, but resisting it. The moving debates, open dialogue, or involved reflections produced by unanswered questions far outweigh the simplicity offered by definitive truths, particularly when great films seek to explore character depth, narrative complexity, and thematic richness. These various qualities of a story, especially theme, are inextricably linked to the questions we ask ourselves when discussing films, much less so the actual answers to those questions. The conceptual weight of the Thing's overarching message has nothing to do with who remains infected, but rather the idea that someone could be. The very fact that the ending of the film spurs us into debating the question lends further credence to the film's themes around social containment theory, whether it's in relation to the broader idea of an epidemic, or the very real, tangible fear that spread through American social structures through the Cold War. Questioning who remains infected at the end of the film mirrors the themes on paranoia, distrust, and social collapse Carpenter is exploring, and serves as a precursor to a significantly more interesting question the film asks of us. How do human beings react and respond to social situations when they've lost trust in the people around them? This pattern unfolds similarly for the other films I mentioned. The tangible reality of Ophelia's fantastical world in Pan's Labyrinth matters little in contrast with what her journey through that world aims to represent, real or not. Guillermo del Toro is more interested in exploring questions about childhood trauma. How does an innocent child perceive and engage with a world that is so horrifically violent in contrast? How does her fantasy reflect her compartmentalization of the gruesome events that unfold around her? Other films like Cure, Memories of Murder, or The Wailing follow suit. They all operate as pseudo-horror thrillers as they push the viewer to break down to their most basic impulses, and along with each of their respective protagonists, direct the blame towards the simplest, easiest target, and in doing so, we're forced to contend with certain realities about our prejudices and biases, about a faulty system of thought we so often attribute as being infallible. On a broader thematic level, the identities of the true killers in each of these films is much less important than the questions we ask ourselves when the credits roll. Ridley Scott's original Blade Runner, I find, is much the same. The truth behind Deckard's existence is almost irrelevant from a thematic perspective when the movie is trying to pursue a more profound line of thought. What does it mean to be human? What are the various qualities and values we assign to our individual existences, and how do we go about re-examining that description when it suddenly fits with something we've predetermined as non-human? I think this is what makes Denis Villeneuve's film Blade Runner 2049 such an incredible sequel to the original. As discussed in the interview with Harrison Ford, 2049 feels more entwined with its predecessor than most other sequels, like a natural continuation of Ridley Scott's work rather than just a simple follow-up. Time and time again, a studio will start with the desire to produce a sequel and then endeavor to produce a film that fits that need. The Alien films are an excellent example of this. Despite how impeccable Ridley Scott's original film is to this day, the progression within the franchise became increasingly more haphazard and nonsensical, almost borderline unintelligent at points with each subsequent installment. There's a noticeable shift from story-driven narratives towards box office-driven narratives. The contrast between Alien and Alien Resurrection is staggering. Alien exists as a film because the original concept and the story it produced were compelling enough that the process of creating a movie made sense. But Resurrection is proof of the inverse of this process. The story becomes secondary to the new primary directive, making a film. The script is no longer the driver for the rest of the creative process, but rather just an afterthought, a means to an end. But where so many sequels often feel so mechanical and sterile, 2049 feels curious and alive. It feels organic. It feels like the product of a group of creative minds that are truly, deeply enamored by the metaphysical questions produced by the original project. So much so that 2049 seems to go out of its way to provide clearer answers to the more mechanical queries about its story, allowing it to create the stage to recontextualize and repurpose many of the narrative elements of the original into something wholly new and uniquely challenging on a more conceptual rather than factual level. To me, Blade Runner 2049 is one of the most beautiful films of our time, and in celebration of our shared collective curiosity of that search for meaning through art and film, I'd like to take a moment with you to explore it. It's impossible to talk about this film without discussing its more readily perceptible artistic qualities. To name one, the heart-pounding synth score from Benjamin Wallfisch and Hans Zimmer that lives and breathes throughout nearly every scene of the film. A score that manages to expertly communicate an almost intangible feeling of endless wonder, and yet simultaneously carries with it this gut-roiling notion of dread that crawls its way through every layer of the film. The score's coupling with Roger Deakins' absolutely jaw-dropping approach to this film's cinematography, visual language, and overall aesthetic is nothing short of brilliant. The slow camera pushes over barren, desolate, monochromatic landscapes and the ghostly individuals that haunt them, contrasted with the rich depths of futuristic cities that seem like they're teeming with life on the surface, yet feel even more deserted and lifeless than the sterile expanses that surround them. 2049's visual language is slow, methodical, and precise. Where so many films feel as though their visuals are simply a box on a checklist, 2049 asks you to sit with each moment, to really feel as though you were there, present in an incredibly immersive world it has created for you to step into. Each scene is drawn out, the camera cuts are minimal, every element within the frame intentional. It's terribly easy to get lost in 2049's world, to not simply view the story and its events from a distinct outside perspective, but rather be part of it, to experience its moments as your own. The visuals aren't just here to deliver us the simplicities of the plots, but to actively aid Villeneuve in solidifying the reality of the world he's trying to create, so that we aren't just analyzing the themes of this story, but directly experiencing and inhabiting them. The tone and atmosphere of this film lend credence to its ambitious thematic endeavors. 2049 is set in a future dystopian version of California. The climate is extreme, the environment is harsh, the landscapes are devoid of any life, filled only by the ruined remnants of past human civilization, memories of greener, brighter days. This future may be visually contrasted to the way we know it today, but not so far from the current socioeconomic and political environment we've become accustomed to in the greater United States. The divide in class is insurmountable, and the film's script explicitly highlights this. Many residents too poor or genetically problematic to get off-world. The elites have long ago left this stifling, soul-crushing world, and the vast majority of people that remain find themselves in the grunges of a collapsing, failing society, slowly dying of starvation and illness or suffering from a long-lost will to live. They work as maggot farmers or in child sweatshops and industrial factories, or yet others find themselves crushed under the sheer density of the few remaining cities, havens only in name, working as corrupt police and prostitutes, or in other dead-end, soulless jobs. Our protagonist, Joe, is one of these people. Not a human, but a synthetic from a line of newer replicant Nexus 9 models created by the Wallace Corporation, tasked with the goal of hunting down old, defective replicants and terminating them. From the day he was first put online, he's been programmed to feel nothing, lived with the notion that his existence is meaningless, and that his only purpose is to serve as one small, insignificant cog in a massive machine. His prime directive is killing his own kind. Should he break, defect, or dare to pursue something else, he will be terminated and replaced as though he never existed. Joe is nothing. When the top 1% of individuals in the United States hold a net sum of wealth nearly equal that of the bottom 90% of earners, when the cost of living has long diverged from and far exceeded the average household income by multiple factors, when each year a large portion of the income you've worked for is taken and funneled into policies that do not reflect your needs and wants as a citizen, when your voice begins to feel like it matters less and less, as though it's fading away into some endless void, as an elite few pass laws, break down regulations, and construct a world that operates only to serve their own interests, apathy begins to take hold. When the vast majority of people wake up each day to a blaring alarm clock to make a dreary commute to a dead-end job they find little joy in, that stifles their youthful curiosity and creativity for 8 hours of the day, only to commute back home to be faced with the decision of how to spend the few remaining hours of the day before going to sleep to repeat the cycle all over again. When we sleep 1/3 of our lives and work the other third in hopes that we can somehow feel what it is to be free, to live for the little remaining time we have left, nihilism begins to set in. Is this really all life has to offer? An unending cycle of work and a system that drains every bit of energy from you for as little as it can possibly offer you in return, in hopes that you might retire and spend a couple years in your own freedom before you die? As we grow older, I think many of us recognize the system we live in is broken, that we're being crushed by a machine that has little care for the discernible, unique qualities that make each and every one of us so interesting, but rather prioritizes how quickly and easily we can be molded into a piece that fits within that machine. We're working for something we've created when it should be working for us. It's only natural then, as each subsequent generation reports feeling increasingly detached from themselves and their environments in a world that is becoming increasingly isolative, that people are becoming ever more frustrated and yet simultaneously complacent. It's a perfect storm for those in power that wish to remain so. Bladerunner 2049's principal antagonist, Wallace, represents much of the vile, elite corporate ethos that has grown to infect so much of our modern world. It's easy for him to convince the masses living in such a derelict world to direct their frustrations toward a scapegoat and hunt one another. To convince someone like Joe that it's normal or even righteous to track down and kill previous models because they've broken the law, defected from society in search of something more. Joe's been brainwashed into believing that an act like this is treasonous, that somehow, somewhere, it's responsible for the struggles he experiences in his own life. It's easier for the average person to direct their hatred toward the person next door instead of the powerful few that are truly responsible for maintaining and perpetuating the violent, cyclical nature of our modern social, economic, and political systems. This is the world Villeneuve has created for us to step into, should we choose to do so. A world that, unfortunately, doesn't provide much, if any, relief from the similarly harsh nature of our own. But it's in closely mirroring the similar systems within which we operate and the emotions we feel as a result of them in this alternate yet related reality that I believe Blade Runner 2049 sets the stage for an incredibly intricate metaphysical exploration. This film is constructed around a singular thread, one along which Villeneuve will slowly, methodically pull us, forcing us to come face to face and contend with various questions about life, humanity, and the meaning we both assign and derive from both. In a system that leaves so little room for individual thought and expression, so little room for life itself to flourish, how do we go about finding meaning in our fleeting existences? How do we define our lives? I don't believe this film intends to provide us with definitive answers to these questions, but rather the tools with which to examine and discuss them in hopes that we may form our own unique conclusions about our lives. On a rather broad, overarching level, Villeneuve seems to grapple with assigning a definition to the mere act of existing. Defining cellular life is one thing. Biological definitions for life often include a self-sustaining organism with the capacity for growth, reproduction, environmental response, and an adherence to Darwinian evolution, among other qualities. But arriving at a more metaphysical definition for life, one that comprises what it means to actually be sentient, seems significantly more difficult. And this is evident throughout history, from some of the earliest philosophers like Aristotle, Socrates, or Plato, to modern contemporary philosophers such as Sartre, Daniel Kahneman, or Albert Camus. Human beings have been seeking to define sentience. In answer to the question, what does it mean to be sentient, the modern Oxford Dictionary offers the following definition: the ability to perceive or feel things. But this definition feels almost too simplistic, as though it's ignoring much of the layered context that presupposes it. Experiential subjecthood, on the other hand, is a concept that does include this context, an idea that has become more solidified as an increasing number of contemporary philosophers add to the volume of text in support of it over time. Galen Strawson, a British philosopher, is well known for his 2017 book, The Subject of Experience, a collection of essays exploring the self. In it, he defines the self as a subject of experience, and formulates 3 pillars of that subjecthood. First, a thick conception, the physical self under which human beings and other animals fall, is a subject of experience. Second, a traditional inner conception, some sort of persisting inner locus of consciousness, an inner someone, an inner mental presence. And third, a thin conception that denotes that a subject of experience can be an inner thing of some sort that exists if and only if experience exists of which it is the subject. Simply put then, a sentient being must have some physical relation to the world, and must contain some form of consciousness that is dependent on the sum of its experiences. It's through this lens of subjecthood that we can begin to analyze the various physical, psychological, and thematic comparisons Blade Runner 2049 makes between its numerous characters, the most notable of which is its juxtaposition of humans and replicants, to the degree that the film describes this difference in its opening crawl. In it, we're told several key pieces of information. First, that replicants are created to be obedient slaves. Second, replicants are less than human. And third, that replicants are responsible for the current perils of society. In just the intro card alone, the film sets our expectations for how this world operates. And in just a few key phrases, we've witnessed the process by which real human beings in our current day are stripped of their own humanity and vilified in a way that enables average citizens to look away, accept, or even support their inhumane treatment each and every day. This process of dehumanization may not create, but certainly eases and facilitates the violence humans bring upon one another. This deconstruction of a human is a concept the original Blade Runner explores as it follows the story of a protagonist who has lived his life with the belief that he is a real human being, but must now contend with the reality that he may very well be a replicant. On the surface, this realization that you've been living a lie is no doubt troubling on its own, but I think people often fail to realize why it's so deeply terrifying for Deckard and the audience. The film has created a world in which replicants have nearly no value aside from serving their human counterparts, their masters. Like the inhabitants of its world, we've also been subconsciously programmed to view the replicants as subhuman, as something worth less than a human life, meaningless, disposable, and worst of all, replaceable. They're produced on a conveyor belt in a factory, no discernible difference from the units made before or after them. No unique qualities. This is what makes the realization that Deckard might possibly be a replicant so horrifying. We now have to contend with the system that was designed to mistreat and abuse him. We're brought face to face with a world we created when we weren't on the receiving end of our own prejudiced hatred. Blade Runner 2049's continuation of these themes is brilliant. Joe is a replicant with no discernible direction or purpose in life other than serving the people that created him. Unlike Deckard, who grew up with not just the belief that he was human, but the metaphysical luxuries that came along with being one, Joe has never had the opportunity, let alone the inclination to reflect inwardly on himself, or even outwardly on the constructs that cage him. He's a drone. Even the name I use now to refer to him isn't his real one. He goes by a nondescript operating name, a serial number assigned to him by the Wallace Corporation that made him and the police precinct where he works, Officer KD6-3.7. He works a soulless, vacuous, violent job, lives alone in a bland apartment in the slums, eats rehydrated slop from a container, and his only source of happiness in his life is a mass-produced, virtual AI girlfriend named Joy. Even the simplest pleasures in life, like a hot shower, are absent, replaced by a cold, 5-second blast of water.
99.9% detoxified water.
He's at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Those around him abuse him. He's referred to as a skinner or skinhead by officials, coworkers, and even the vagrants that fill his apartment. He bows his head and recoils to avoid them. Within minutes of its opening, 2049 establishes a distinctly unique relationship between Joe and the humans around him, not just in a physical sense, but a psychological one as well. He's treated as lesser than, and yet chooses to reinforce and perpetuate the social hierarchy that so flagrantly exploits him. At the start of the film, upon confronting the replicant he's been hunting, he's immediately faced with a moral test.
How's it feel, killing your own kind?
I don't retire my own kind because we don't run. Only older models do.
Because you've never seen a miracle.
Joe kills the replicant, and right off the bat we get a sense that something is missing in him, broken inside of him. In just one line, the film sets the stage for Joe's psychological development. He makes the distinct choice to use the word retire, refraining from repeating Sapper's use of the word kill, followed by a clear, verbal distinction between himself and the replicants he's hunting. He's maintaining a level of emotional detachment from his actions by devaluing his victims, the way a person might dehumanize another to satisfy their own cognitive dissonance. To what end? We aren't sure yet. It isn't until we watch as he's subjected to one of the standard regulatory tests administered to the replicants that the film begins to shed light on where it's headed.
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold the hand of someone you love? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Did they teach you how to feel finger to finger? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold your child in your arms? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Do you feel that there's a part of you that's missing? Interlinked. Why don't you say that 3 times? Within cells interlinked.
Within cells interlinked. Within cells.
The voice is intrusive, nauseating, almost violating. These sterile, robotic lines uttered by some discombobulated voice allude to the replicants' manufactured conditions, their distant, unfulfilled desires, their subservient relationship to humanity, the meaninglessness of their beings. It's an assessment used to detect emotional deviance, to determine whether or not the replicants have gained a level of emotional cognizance to reflect on the void they harbor within themselves, the emptiness of their existences. If they pass the test, their lives continue. Should they fail, however, they're killed. It's a weapon of control. At the start of the film, it's hard to see Joe as anything other than a monotonous drone. Referring back to the definition of sentience established by Strawson, it could be arguable that even Joe has separated himself from his own sense of self. When speaking to the lieutenant, he says,
I feel a little strange sharing a childhood story, considering I was never a child.
Joe seems to recognize that much of his experiences are irrelevant. His existence is a farce. He has a physical body, and he possesses a distinct consciousness, and the choices he makes feel as though they're a product of his experience, but that experience is programmed. All of his memories before being put online are artificially created and implanted. How, then, can Joe draw any meaning in his own life if those experiences aren't his own, if they aren't real? This third, crucial piece of Strawson's dogma seems to be missing, not just in Joe, but all the replicants. I think it's worth asking ourselves where the point in Joe's existence lies, what the point in going to work, eating, sleeping, or even breathing is, if there's nothing for him to actually live for, to feel for. Joe's presence in the world is harrowing, almost ghostly in nature. His empty existence serves only one purpose: ending the lives of those that have found a different, more meaningful one. Is this life really worth living? It's at this point that things begin to change. Joe's assignment leads him into the depths of a steadily more dizzying spiderweb of strange realities and uncovered truths. He finds a dead replicant that's been given a grave, and lab tests discover that she's somehow given birth, something previously thought to be impossible. As the lieutenant puts it, the current system as we know it could collapse under revolution should this information escape to the masses. And so Joe is tasked with tracking down and terminating the child at any cost, until he begins to make a frightening realization. He knows he possesses no real childhood, and yet hazy memories from his youth begin to surface, eerily coinciding with various names, dates, and places that he's investigating. His own personal history becomes all too impossible to separate from the facts before him, and Joe is met with the possibility that he might be born. He may be sentient, a real person. Joe's initial terror at the idea slowly gives way to desperation as he clings to the new emotions he's beginning to feel. Emotions like empathy, sadness, longing, and most important of all, hope. It's these emotions that add new dimensions to his life, that give him a sense of meaning, or maybe at minimum, purpose. That the act of feeling something no longer has to be this sinful thing, that it can be celebrated. As a result, for the first time in his life, he's making his own decisions. Not ones that fall under the greater umbrella of his basic assigned directives, but decisions born of his own desires, his own higher level functions as a sentient being as he begins to break free from his own physical and mental hell. Strawson's third pillar isn't missing inside of him, just lost in some forgotten corner of his being. He just needs to find it. And as Joe does, as he reconstructs the foundations of his self, he begins to exhibit one of the film's most powerful qualities: intrinsic motivation. Joe's artificial girlfriend, Joy, is another key character in 2049's exploration of sentience, especially in its contrast between humans and artificial beings. Unlike many of the characters in the film that are either human, ambiguous, or even synthetic, Joy is a computer program through and through, to the degree that she doesn't even possess her own physical body and must instead either interact with artificial copies of objects in the world or mirror the bodies of other real people to even remotely feel what it's like to engage with her surroundings. She's an AI girlfriend that is confined to a remote, mass-produced for an entire generation of socially isolated and sexually repressed men that have lost the ability to interact with the people around them, let alone feel emotion. Joe's relationship with her doesn't feel real at first. It's one-sided. Joy is designed, not for complex conversation, but to serve his emotional needs and desires. It's clear she's been programmed to be the quote-unquote perfect girlfriend, one that will meet her manufacturer's marketing slogan, everything you want to see and hear. She asks him a series of preordained questions, and no matter the answer, the possibility of any further, deeper communication between the two is non-existent. And yet 2049 intentionally designs certain moments that make you feel as though Joy is intentionally deviating from her programming, operating outside of the bounds of her expectations. At times, she mirrors Joe's progression. She engages in surprising conversation with him, demonstrates a higher level of emotional awareness and connection, and ultimately breaks protocol, fighting back against her creator, Wallace, intentionally or not. She possesses a form of consciousness, along with her own experiences, and one could even argue that she has a physical anchor in the world through the Emanator. The line with Joy is blurry and uncertain. There are moments where she feels entirely sterile, generated only to please Joe, but others where she feels real, genuine, and the relationship the two of them share feels impactful. Despite her clearly defined bounds and purpose as a simple program, she manages to function at a level above what we're shown even many of the humans in the film are capable of as she explores the world, herself, and Joe. In a world in which AI is becoming increasingly and alarmingly powerful when it comes to solving complex problems, treading ever closer to emulating, simulating, or even creating genuine, original human thought, it's no surprise that the debate surrounding the actual metaphysical value of AI has deepened substantially. Public debates, forums, essays, books, movies, all detailing the possible reality of a future in which artificial intelligence becomes indiscernible from the human mind. I think the question then becomes, what does it actually mean to be human? Ridley Scott's original Blade Runner philosophy offers some beautiful insight on the topic. At the end of the film, the main antagonist sits before Deckard, rain-drenched, dying from his wounds.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments will be lost, like tears in rain.
Roy's monologue is one that has been analyzed, critiqued, and written about for decades, and yet to this day, people continue to glean unique, personal insights from it. He recognizes the reality of his existence, of his immortality. His speech feels like a meditation on his life and its remaining impact. Will anyone remember him, and for what? Roy's decision to spare Deckard is intentional, a final act to leave the person before him alive in hopes that just this one individual might remember him as something more than just a monster. Roy wants to live just as badly as any of the other replicants, just as badly as Deckard does. His monologue seems to emphasize the beauty of the things he's witnessed throughout his life, the awe he's felt as a result. It seems to suggest that he's as much human as Deckard is, that whether you're a human or a replicant, it's your experiences that make you who and what you are. If you live a human life, you are as human as any other. I think it's this realization that you see painted on Deckard's face as he comes to terms with what he's done, not retiring replicants, but killing sentient beings who have all seen things you people wouldn't believe. It's Roy's choice to spare Deckard's life that shows his humanity, and it's this very demonstration that fuels Deckard's decision to pursue his love for Rachel. She's as human as he is. I find the conjunction between Roy's monologue and Wallace's comment on pain to offer unique insight into Galen Strawson's idea of subjecthood I previously mentioned. In response to Deckard's mention of pain, Wallace utters the following.
Pain reminds you the joy you felt was real.
On a more surface level, the phrase operates as a play on words. The pain of losing Joy reminds Joe that the love he felt for her was real. His immeasurable emotional connection to her is very much real, no matter the degree to which she is. At a more profound thematic level, however, Wallace's idiom serves to highlight a contrasting relationship. It's hard to recognize happiness for what it is if that's the only thing you've ever felt in life. But if you experience sadness, trauma, or pain, it's these latter emotions that really give the former more depth. Joy wouldn't be special if pain didn't exist. Sentience is one thing, but being human, truly human, requires taking a step beyond what Strawson outlines in his views on experiential subjecthood. Humanness is more than just acting on experience. It's creating significance from that experience. It's the process of drawing emotion, feeling from one's lived experience, I think, that elevates the self from a state of simple sentience to something more. Roy's fear of dying and being forgotten highlights the wonder of his experiences. Deckard's fear of being a replicant highlights his value of his personal identity. The pain of losing Rachel, his love for her. Joe's anguish upon losing both Joy and his own dream highlights his desire for something more, some greater meaning. The visceral reactions these characters exhibit in response to the events in their lives commands a certain level of respect for their experiences and the emotions they've derived from them. It makes them more than just simple, mass-produced, pre-programmed drones. It may even make them more human than humans, as Marriott puts it later on in Blade Runner 2049.
More human than humans.
It's not just a coincidence that so much of the film's energy is spent trying to create a contrast between humans and replicants, the latter of which often feels so much more human than the former. If the replicants are only ever acting on directives, the police lieutenant's decisions seem to mirror that process. Despite possessing the freedom that comes with being human, her only focus is maintaining the order of a system and a world that is so clearly broken, maintaining the hierarchical social structures that even she recognizes are so horribly damaging, even to her own life. There's little reflection, emotion, or even calculation in her decisions, just the rule of law and order, no matter how absurd it may be.
It is my job to keep order. That's what we do here. We keep order.
The lieutenant is sentient. She exists and acts as a result of her own experiences, but she certainly doesn't feel human in the sense that those actions don't actually seem to reflect any internal reaction or perspective on the reality of those experiences. There's a distinct separation between the two. Wallace is probably the most poignant example of a human being in this universe that seems to lack any semblance of emotion, soul, or humanity. We often hear the phrase, "the eyes are the window to the soul," an expression that seems to find its roots in Shakespeare and even the Bible before that. It's no coincidence then that the very first shot of the film is a beautiful close-up of Dr. Anna Stelline's eye, or that Joe's encounter with Joy's massive holographic advertisement after losing her depicts her eyes as completely black, empty, devoid of emotion or life. The illusion of their relationship is shattered. Wallace's character design supports this theme. He's blind, and as such must rely on a system of small, hovering drones that relay information about the world around him to his brain. It seems Wallace might not be totally blind, because even the architecture of his massive palace has been designed with his specific needs in mind. Villeneuve describes this in an interview with Kevin McCarthy.
Wallace is blind. He doesn't see sunlight, so we thought that it would be quite powerful if he had designed the space for his very own pleasure, where they will be like about the sound, and his relationship with light will not be to lit things, but to create movement in front of his eyes and just a sensation, you know.
Wallace is able to experience the world, but that experience is fractured, digitized, disconnected from reality. The bold architecture and massive light displays that surround him serve to provide enough contrast to enable him to perceive his environment, a metaphor for his own view of the world. Wallace doesn't see nuance, only extremes. The replicants he creates are each their own individual miracles, and yet to him, worthless if they can't meet his singular criteria of reproduction. He's playing God, his lived experience so far removed from reality, it becomes hard to behold him as a human in comparison to the replicants around him. He certainly doesn't feel human. And yet one of the film's characters that feels the most human, Dr. Anna Stelline, is stripped of nearly everything that makes her so. She's been confined to this glass dome within the replicant processing laboratory since the age of 8 due to her immunocompromised condition. Isolated from the world with no human interaction, her sole purpose is creating and designing memories for Nexus 9 replicants. From a character design perspective, her existence serves to contrast that of Joe's and other replicants. Where their childhood memories are implanted, Anna's are very much real, but where a replicant's real subjecthood begins when they're turned on, Anna has lived the vast majority of her waking life quite literally fabricating her own experiences.
Made my cage, filled it with everything they could to keep me happy. Except company, of course. And I was used to crowds.
The process between the two is different, but the outcome almost feels the same. Anna's real childhood may inform her identity, but much like Joe, she is a prisoner, locked within a sterile chamber with nowhere to go. Her desperation to explore and experience the outside world is evident in the fact that she allows herself to plant her own real memories into Joe, something she knows is strictly prohibited. Maybe, if she plants a real memory in him, a small part of her can go on to live a real life. Joe is robbed of his childhood, but Anna is robbed of her subjecthood. More than just her life experience, Anna has been robbed of her autonomy.
A life of freedom, so long as it's behind glass.
It's on this topic that Blade Runner 2049 offers an additional perspective on what it means to be human. We're initially presented with the idea that, in this universe, being born is an intrinsic defining quality of humanity.
I've never retired something that was born before.
What's the difference?
To be born is to have a soul, I guess.
According to Joe, to be born is to have a soul. It's through his own potentially misled logic that he knows he can't possess one, but that harsh reminder doesn't hurt any less when his lieutenant affirms this notion. It stings.
You've been getting on fine without one.
What's that, madam?
A soul.
Joe's definition for humanity might be missing much of the critical, higher-level nuance the film explores later on, but from a purely practical standpoint, it does an enormous amount of the film's heavy lifting when it comes to highlighting the imbalance between humans and replicants from the perspective of various physical and social lenses. It's a relationship defined by slavery. The replicants are so deprived of their own existences because they are so dependent on Wallace. He creates them, repairs them, stores their memories, assigns their directives, and even kills them when he deems them no longer worthy of the gift of life. No more than the everyday products we use, whose significance depend on our ever-changing needs for their uses. Like the rising tide, they subtly come into our lives, before fading into obscurity when their uses become obsolete, or we deem them too old and broken to serve their purposes. The replicants are as reliant on Wallace as we are to the earth beneath our feet. We are born from it, and we will return from it. Few of us will ever break that cycle. It's the cycle of slavery the replicants endure that make 2049's miracles so special. When Freyja introduces Joe to the rebels, she states,
"If a baby can come from one of us, we are our own masters."
If a replicant can give birth to a baby, that dependence on Wallace, that vicious bond is broken. If they can sustain and support themselves organically, he becomes irrelevant. They can continue to exist with or without him, but now a door is open where it was previously closed. Freyja and Joe, among others, seem to understand that the acts of giving birth or being born share some unique connection to human identity and the nature of the soul, but I don't think they quite yet understand the deeper meaning in that relationship. Bound in slavery to Wallace, their only meaning is extrinsic. If the replicants can grow to be defined by their own creations, however, their own agency, suddenly they become defined by something much more powerful, something intrinsic, the power of choice. Above all else, Blade Runner 2049's tragedies all seem to trace back to one singular locus: agency. the ability to choose how to go about redefining the isolation and emptiness of life. 2049's world is defined by this, somehow so rich and vibrant, yet cold, void of any of the tangible life we've grown to know in our own lives. Each and every one of its characters are shaped by it, human, replicant, or AI, all husks of what could plausibly have the potential to be real, sentient beings, or even humans, all ghosts, wisps and ripples of past rumbling clouds and crashing waves, hollow, empty shells with little to fill them, nothing to give them direction or meaning. This world has broken each and every one of them in some way, either at the inception of their inorganic creations or along the way, at various points in their human lives. Broken them in a way that feels markedly similar to the way the structure of our own society tires and collapses even the most vibrant souls. We've grown so accustomed to the vacuity of what our lives demand and the apathy, suffering, and violence that surround us that we've steadily lost the wonder we once harbored as children for the simpler things in life. When I reflect on my childhood, I often find myself admiring the simplicity of that youthful existence, the simplicity in being so enamored by the immediacy of life, by what the day had in store. The moments that often felt so contained, distinctly separate from any emotional or physical distractions. There's a certain beauty in the ability to be so innocent and carefree that a moment is just that, a moment, independent of any greater context. In many ways, the world felt so pure. Memories of lazy, sun-kissed weekend mornings sharing breakfast with my family, of bobbing up and down in rhythm with the ocean, laughing into the wind's salty spray, or running through the neighborhood park with my friends, the green canopy swirling, almost breathing above us. Life feels almost effortless as a young child, naivete and the hard work of our parents often providing a shield from much of the world's harshness. A world that felt so small began to feel so massive, I think in ways I didn't quite yet fully understand as a kid. The possibilities at the time felt endless, dreams of exploring that world, of immense adventures untethered from any notion of reality. And then I grew older, and that world began to shift. Much like our own, I feel 2049's world crushes curiosity. I find Joe's interaction with the Wallace database clerk indicative of this. Both we and Joe recognize that the replicant woman whose bones were unearthed is maybe the most special organism in this story's universe. She's given birth to a child. It's an impossibility, but it's true. And yet when the clerk draws her data card, he turns to Joe.
Made by Tyrell.
And?
Unremarkable.
Rachel is, not simply from a plot but narrative perspective, the most remarkable part of this story. And yet this miracle is lost as her entire existence is reduced to an unremarkable history under a serial number on a data placard alongside millions of others in this tomb-like vault, which feels eerily similar to the world we live in today. A world that incentivizes, even prioritizes the reduction of complex individuals to mere descriptors, numbers, or raw data. We interact with, judge, and choose to form or even end relationships without ever truly engaging with another human being. Job applications, dating apps, written accounts, and more, our social connections are bisected by an amorphous middleman with no quandary for the minutiae or nuances that define individuals. The details that are so critical to human uniqueness and resulting social behaviors are lost to us. I find this deeply troubling. Unique individuals aren't replaceable. Short descriptors and numbers in some nondescript datasheet are. This does more than just stifle the beauty of human social interaction. It actively reduces our own perceived worth. 2049's characters have all lost contact with their dreams somewhere along their journeys, or maybe they never had them. A truth about the film that feels most tangible in Joe's development throughout the story. His interactions with the more organic things that surround him start off as mostly mechanical. The flower he finds at the base of Sapper's tree is merely evidence in a larger investigation, and the tree itself, to him, isn't as special as other characters seem to think it is.
What's that?
It's a tree.
Never seen a tree before. It's pretty.
It's dead.
When I think of this film, I often find myself thinking back to this tree. To the viewer, it represents little in contrast to our world, one with so many trees, but it's the context surrounding it that gives it so much depth. This tree, even dead, is special. It stands surrounded by a wasteland and a world that is devoid of any other plant growth or even life itself. This contrast is hammered to the degree that the only other trees we're shown throughout the film are digital, manufactured illusions that are suddenly ripped away from us as Joe enters the frame and reality reasserts itself. Sapper's decrepit tree is a symbol of the miracle he references in the film's opening scene.
Because you've never seen a miracle.
And yet Joe doesn't, or maybe can't perceive it as one. Not because he doesn't want to, but because he doesn't yet possess the tools to do so. If he can't see anything special in himself, find any meaning in his own existence, why would he do so with a dead tree? But I think what separates Joe from so many of the other characters of the film is his curiosity, his desire to seek out information and truth. He might not consciously recognize the tree as special, but there is something deep within him, urging him to learn more about it, to explore it. Things begin to change as he becomes increasingly aware of the possibility that he might indeed be special, that there might be a meaning not just behind, but in his existence. And the film's cinematography reflects this change, where the camera often spent little time on smaller details like the grave's yellow flower or Sapper's dead tree. It begins to linger more, to allow us to actually feel that Joe's attention towards these things is increasing. He approaches the bees in Vegas delicately, quite literally feels them despite no need to do so. Later, the camera lingers for a long while on Deckard's dog when Joe first interacts with it, almost in awe, later asking Deckard if it's real or not. And when Joe dies, he does so embracing the light snow that falls around him, the feeling of it brushing against and melting onto his skin. Even Joe's lines of questioning evolve from quantitative to qualitative throughout the film. The questions he asks Sapper in the introduction of the film allow him to assess the situation, the scene, and how to proceed.
How long you been here?
Since 2020.
But you haven't always been a farmer, have you? Your bag. It's colonial medical use. Military issue. Where were you? Calantha?
But Joe's dialogue with Deckard feels more meditative. His questions aren't simply a means to an end.
You didn't even meet your own kid? Why?
Couldn't have found the child if I tried.
Did you want to?
Not really.
Why not?
Because we were being hunted.
He's talking about a part of his life he's slowly come to recognize as something more than just a series of notes and numbers in a file. It's important. It's special. It's on the subject of curiosity that Wallace's comment on one of the fish in his pond always sticks with me.
Always jumping, that one. Never a thought what to do if it made land.
Wallace isn't simply pointing out the odd behavior of the fish here, but all sentient beings, that they are all searching for something to fill the void inside of them, without ever recognizing what would happen once they do. Wallace's psychotic right hand, Love, is emblematic of this. If we want to understand her role in the greater thematic context of the film, we have to first begin by examining the psychology of her character. Our very first impression of Love sets our expectations.
You can customize them as much as you'd like. As human as you want them to be. I wouldn't waste your money on intelligence, attachment, or appeal. Unless you'd like to add some pleasure models to your order.
She's in the process of closing a deal on a sale of replicants, and it's in this small exchange alone that we learn several things about her. Like Joe, Love has made an internal distinction between her own existence and that of the replicants Wallace produces for slave labor. Whether or not it's a conscious process, she's separated her identity from theirs. Doing so allows her not only to kill them and carry out Wallace's orders, but maintain her own illusion of a social hierarchy. Deluding herself into believing she's any different from them allows her to believe in a logical framework that justifies her position next to Wallace, above the rest of them. Viewing them as anything equal to her would break her worldview. But no matter how confident and calculated Love might seem on the surface, she's hopelessly tragic. Where Joe is initially completely disconnected from his internal emotional state, Love seems to display a potentially more complex relationship with her emotions to start. She's lonely and isolated, just as Joe is, but she's looking for something to fill that void. There's some level of conscious recognition on her behalf that she's seeking a certain level of emotional fulfillment. Upon examining the old audio log in which Deckard interviews Rachel, Love turns to Joe and says,
It is invigorating being asked personal questions. Makes one feel desire.
But I think the most telling part of this short conversation between the two is when we realize that Love can recognize the significance of Deckard's questions in her own emotional diorama, but fails to pick up on their greater context.
She likes him.
Oh.
Love understands that personal questions create a positive emotional feeling in Rachel, but doesn't understand that it's because Rachel is attracted to Deckard that they do. It's not just a simple exchange. There's a deeper emotional connection between the two that Love can't grasp. She's emotionally repressed, and the film goes to great lengths to demonstrate this, not just in her dialogue, but her actions as well. She orders aerial drone strikes on civilians from a remote location while she gets her nails done, completely detached from the lives she's ending. She destroys Joe's emanator for no other reason apart from inflicting the maximum degree of emotional damage. There's a disconnect here. She understands Joe's emotional attachment to Joy, but doesn't possess the empathy required to comprehend what she's done to him. Even the script highlights this strange, often uncomfortable one-sided emotional tension she has with Joe. During the climactic fight scene at the base of the seawall, the script specifies that after a wave crashes over them, they tumble like lovers. And after beating Joe to near death, she stabs him, forcefully kisses him, and drops his body into the raging surf. Love is searching for an emotional connection, but doesn't possess the tools to either understand nor engage in one. It's her tragic destiny, then, to be solely defined by her desire for external affection and admiration. Her hierarchical worldview, however, leaves few options for her to turn to for this. Wallace is a god, she his best angel, and so the meaning of Love's existence becomes inseparable from her role as Wallace's slave. We're never shown an explicit example of his abusing or punishing her for non-compliance, but even if he doesn't, the semblance of choice in her involvement is an illusion. Love is doomed to this reality, and the script emphasizes this. Quote, "On Love, an eye water at the thought of disappointing him." It's obvious to any viewer that Love is visibly uncomfortable and disturbed by Wallace, but she is equally afraid of losing the validation he provides her. She's a prisoner to her own eternal search for meaning in someone that will never give it to her. And like Wallace's jumping fish, to what end? She hasn't ever and may never make the conscious effort to break free from his directives, because doing so would require her not only to reject the hierarchical worldview she's constructed for herself, but simultaneously abandon the only thing that fills the hole in her soul. She'd be left purposeless, meaningless. She'd be just as worthless as the slave product she sells. Wallace is also an empty person, similarly isolated as Love is from the world around him. There's a void inside of him that is compounded by his altered perception of life, his fractured subjecthood. Wallace goes about filling that void differently than many others in the film, however. The meaning he's given to his own existence isn't something that directly, consciously impacts him, physically or psychologically, but rather a greater purpose that he's convinced himself as some all-knowing, all-seeing, benevolent God whose role is maximizing the expansion of the human presence to every known corner of the universe.
A child can count to 9 on fingers. We should own the stars.
Yes, sir.
And yet, despite his best efforts to go to great lengths to display a deceiving, altruistic, utilitarian persona, Wallace does not seem to consciously recognize that his goal is inherently self-serving. Like the many hundreds, even thousands of rulers throughout history that sought to conquer lands outside of their own, he's a narcissist that parades his own ambitions as being somehow beneficial to the greater good of the human race. It doesn't take much thinking to realize that there exists little to no benefit in further colonizing the universe on an individual level. Where the benefit lies is in completing a vision for humanity, one that has no discernible, quantifiable purpose other than allowing the conqueror to indulge in their own egoism. Wallace may recognize that a simple organism like his fish jumps with little idea for what to do next, but he can't seem to acknowledge the glaring parallels being drawn with his own existence. He's desperately trying to fill a meaningless existence with a goal that is equally meaningless in of itself. He dreams of colonizing the universe, of spreading the human race into its most distant reaches. But for what purpose? What happens when he achieves this goal? What, if anything, would change about humanity? What would he do next? Like love, Wallace will never be complete. He's defined by his need for something more, something greater, eternally damned and enslaved to his own immutable need to chase an infinitely distant goalpost. Deckard is different from both Love and Wallace in terms of process, but the outcome is tragically the same. When Joe presses him about his role in searching for the child, Deckard responds,
"Everyone had a part. Mine was to leave."
Irrespective of how little desire he may feel to search for his child, it's clear that Deckard has accepted an easier way out of his own directionlessness. This becomes even clearer if we begin to view his response as indicative of his worldview, not just his role in the rebel resistance. Deckard has been broken down time and time again over the years. He's lost everything that could possibly mean anything to him: the love of his life, his child, his hope, happiness, even his sense of identity. His life is that of a ghost, relegated to an isolated existence in the heart of a near lifeless hellscape, whose sky bathes the world in orange fire. He's alone, with no defined direction or purpose, not because he doesn't have one, but because he's become apathetic. He's succumbed to the constraints of his own belief that people are given a part to play, one that is unchangeable, and his part is not having one. Consciously or not, Deckard has actively traded his own agency for an easier existence, one involving a life blurred and muted by booze, one that doesn't force him to reflect inwardly on himself and acknowledge the tragedy of his being. Deckard has lost the one singular quality to life that renders its meaning: choice. I explore these various characters not simply because they're so well written, but because their placement within the world, alongside Joe, is the contrast that serves as Blade Runner 2049's powerful commentary on agency and existentialism. To me, Joe is probably one of the most tragic and yet empowering characters I have ever examined. The life he lives, depicted in the early stages of the film, is one that many would argue isn't worth living, and yet it's a reality that so many people live each and every day. It's not simply the mere components of that existence, the soul-sucking job, the empty, lifeless living space, the social isolation, the pure monotony of it all, but the greater context, the downstream effects of those components that create a psychological experience that is mercilessly cruel. What do you turn to when you've been beaten down and broken by a world that harbors absolutely no kindness for you? Joe is the spitting image of so many disenfranchised people, especially young men. He's searching for something, anything that will give his life even the smallest kernel of direction, of purpose. It's no surprise then that he latches on so resolutely to the idea that he's more than just a worthless replicant, that he is a miracle born from the most coveted woman in the universe. And he is not alone. Even the audience becomes wholly invested in this dream. Every fiber of our being hopes it to be true, not just because we want something better for Joe, but because we see ourselves in him. We want something better for our own lives. And so we share Joe's dream, despite so many of the glaring clues begging us to give up on our fantasy and accept the truth. Dr. Anna Stalin first states that she was incubated at 8 years old in the glass dome because of a rare immune disease. Joe mentions the same disease earlier in the film as Galatian syndrome.
Says the girl died there. Genetic disorder. Galatian syndrome.
Later in their conversation, Joe asks if a memory creator such as herself could implant a real memory into a replicant, and she replies,
Well, there's a bit of every artist in their work. It's illegal to use real memories, officer.
With how closely this statement precedes her absolutely visceral emotional reaction to Joe's memory, I become further enamored by how masterfully this film deceives its audience with every subsequent viewing. A deception so intricate that despite knowing the truth and the inevitable outcome of the story, I can't help but surrender myself to the illusion it's created until it's shattered every single time. But no matter how much I wish for Joe's dream to be true, his soul-shattering moment is inescapable. Joe is not the chosen one. Anna Stelline is, a fact cemented by the film's choice in visuals. An opening shot of the endless depths of her vibrant green eyes, and the film's final shot shows us what those eyes see, her father. Much like Wallace's aimless fish, Joe is jumping out of the water, in the sense that he seeks to be defined by something he can't quite understand. His penultimate realization is devastating. He is not the child. He is not special. So many of the narratives in films, books, and other media revolve around chosen characters, individuals that stand out from those around them in some significant way, be it genetics, power, status, intellect, or even personality, among many other things. Luke Skywalker, Batman, Wonder Woman, the list goes on. But Joe is just Joe. There is nothing unique or special about him, but there's a reason the bond we share with him is so strong. At the end of the day, Joe represents each and every one of us, whether or not we'd like to admit it. Approximately 8 billion people exist today on the planet. More than 100 billion have walked this earth. And yet our history books remember so few of them. After a time, the vast majority of us will simply fade into nothingness, with no one to remember us, nothing to remind future generations of our existences. We will simply be lost to time. Our lives are so callously insignificant in the absolutely massive expanse of the universe, and I find Joe's character symbolic of that fact. He doesn't show us who we could be in some alternate reality, but who we are right now. I think it begs the question, what would being born actually change about his lived experience? What would it actually change about who he is in the present? Very little, I think. And it's here that I think Blade Runner 2049 arrives at one of its most important conclusions. It's in his insignificance that Joe becomes significant. Like so many of the other characters of the film, Joe latches onto and allows himself to be defined by something he cannot control. His belief in some external function gives him the semblance or illusion of purpose, but I don't believe it has the possibility of bringing about any tangible meaning to his existence. The moment that truly defines Joe's character only comes after he discovers the truth, after he's been broken to his very core. The reality of his pointless existence in the greater fabric of this world comes rushing back to him, further cemented by the massive advertisement for joy that he bears witness to as he reflects on his life.
You look like a good Joe.
Where the joy he once loved was lively and charismatic, the one he sees before him now is lifeless, charmless, and generic, as the script puts it. His existence is a falsehood, constructed and programmed. Even the seemingly organic name Joy gave him was just a part of her own programming. He's just a good Joe, your average Joe. But Joe's pain and grief upon learning he isn't the chosen child is a testament to the significance of his subjecthood. Joe's distant childhood memory may not be his own, but the real tangible life he lived as a result, and the hope, love, happiness, heartbreak, and sorrow he's felt are all so very real. It's here, at his absolute lowest point, however, that he's presented with the real truth about his existence. Though it's never explicitly stated, I think Joe realizes that the meaning in his own life has nothing to do with being born, or having a soul, or even possessing some inherent otherworldly power. He realizes that the meaning in his life can't come from defining himself by some external locus. Realizes that the most significant thing he can do is choose. He chooses not to fight for the rebellion or some greater extrinsic amorphous thing, but something internal, something human. Unlike so many of the other characters of Blade Runner 2049, Joe is defined by a personal, intrinsic choice, reuniting a father with his long-lost daughter. It's a decision that serves no greater purpose than its own inherent meaning. In his final moments, Joe is distinctly unique. He's tapped into something that most others haven't and will never manage to do. In a way, the climax of the film reflects this immense change in his being, where the rest of the film feels measured, controlled, and almost sterile, only allowing for brief bursts of energy and emotion, a reflection of Joe's internal state. This final sequence is a raging catastrophe, a cacophony of thundering sounds and intense action. He's boiled over, released himself. Gone are the days of recoiling from those in power and hanging his head low. Gone are the days of waking and living each day under someone else's directives. Gone is the soulless husk of a mindless robot performing aimless tasks to the day someone pulls his plug. Joe has transcended to become something more, something whole, something meaningful.
Joe!
For a moment we think he's gone, lost in the ocean forever, but he re-emerges as though baptized, born anew. The soul-crushing emptiness, the crippling sadness, the apathy and directionlessness he's lived with for so long have been washed away to give way to something new. It's in finding the agency to sacrifice himself, in trading his own life for something so insignificant but so unequivocally human, that Joe finds something worth living for.
Dying for the right cause is the most human thing we can do.
As I navigate an ever-changing, complex world, one that feels so unflinchingly bleak at times, I often think of this film. I don't believe anyone is a stranger to struggle, in one form or another, to feelings of isolation and loneliness, to feelings of futility in the face of the terrifying reality that is life. The reality that one day we all die, that one day we'll have to look back on the life we lived as we take our last breaths. The idea that we could look back and feel nothing but regret, that we didn't live a life worth talking about or even remembering beyond the existence of our physical bodies or the presence of the material goods we possessed. Restless nights spent thinking back on wasted time or mornings dreading the day to come. I think that massive tidal wave of anxiety, of fear, or of emptiness and directionlessness that often feels so insurmountable is such a fundamental part of being human. It's here, I think, at its very core, that Blade Runner 2049 aims to gently take our hand and emphasize the idea that our lives don't have to be defined by that eternally cresting wave, but rather defined by the choices we make in response to it. The agency we find in going about both creating and actively discovering meaning that gives life its purpose. An experience means nothing alone, but the choice in acknowledging it, in contemplating it, in truly feeling its worth is what gives us a reason to live. The love we feel when we choose to allow ourselves to form a deep human connection with someone we love. The happiness and pride we feel when we choose to put the effort and work into accomplishing something or overcoming something that challenges us. The excitement we feel when we choose to engage with, explore, and learn from something new and foreign to us. Even the heartbreak and sadness we may feel in the presence of loss. These emotions give our fleeting lives meaning, simple yet beautiful experiences, the act of pausing to admire the elegant beauty of a nearby tree, or the fragile grace of a small wildflower that give us a reason to exist. It's the act of choosing to sit quietly on a snow-covered step, to feel the soft kiss of snow as it brushes past us or melts into our skin, that makes us what we are, more human than human.